This is the very last video in a 5-series playlist, something that I call the 5-step process. I swear by this process, okay? The 5 steps are how a veteran truly aims to be properly rated by the VA. All right, it's what claim companies do. It's what your attorney's kind of going to do for denials. This is how a veteran gets properly rated and the most bang for your buck, if you will. Now, the 5 steps are increases, secondaries, denials, new claims. And this video, which is number 5, is presumptive and TERA. I'm roping those into the same step here, but they are very different, and that's what I'm going to explain now. There's going to be a playlist down below that goes through the 5 steps. I have videos on every single step as thorough as I can possibly make them. This one is for presumptive and TERA. Now, these are very different, okay? And I want to start this out. I'm going to start with TERA claims because those are most complicated. And I'm going to be clear as day here. So listen to me closely. TERA claims are not presumptive whatsoever. Not even a little bit. TERA is not presumptive. All right. TERA, T-E-R-A, stands for toxic exposure risk activity. And this is everything from like being exposed to heavy particulate matter and JP8 fuel to asbestos and herbicides, right? And there's a billion other exposures out there, but some of the most common conditions I see connected via TERA, mainly for Gulf War veterans, all the way back from Shield Storm. And I would also include early Iraq, like Iraq 2003, 2007, for claims like sleep apnea, GERD. There's some other neurological body system claims. And sometimes you'll see musculoskeletal conditions connected via TERA, although those are pretty rare. And those time frames I gave are just what I see most common. All right, I've seen a few veterans in Afghan from 2012, 2013 be rated under TERA. So it's definitely way broader than just Shield Storm and then early OIF. I don't want to give that impression off. It's just what I've seen, particularly for sleep apnea. I've seen a decent amount of Shield Storm and early Iraq veterans connected sleep apnea via TERA, which is essentially direct. And I'll explain that here in a second. There are theories of service connection that are direct and secondary, and those two are by far the most common. Then you have aggravation, which in my opinion is very difficult. Then you have something called, or what I call VHA oopsies, which is when like your VA healthcare team makes a huge mistake and it causes you to have a disability. But again, that's rare. And then finally you have TERA, toxic exposure risk activity. And I would describe TERA as a combination of direct and secondary. Now, the reason I'm even spending time on talking about the basis or the theory of service connection is because that theory shifts how you present evidence. If you're going for direct service connection, then your evidence should be directly from your military service, current diagnosis, current documented symptoms. That's always great. Maybe a continuity of symptoms depending on timeline there. And then obviously the nexus, right? That's the big 3. In-service event, current diagnosis with documented symptoms. Continuity of symptoms is also part of number 2. And then 3 is the nexus. But that's for direct. And you want your evidence to fall in the big 3. It shifts for secondary. It's just for everything. And for TERA, it's really going to shift for TERA. Now, there is a ton to go over here. I'm going to make this as plain and simple that is consumable for the average veteran on what matters most. All right. TERA is a combination of direct and secondary. It's direct because the exposure happened in service, right? Bonus points if that exposure is well documented. It's more difficult when the exposure is not documented, or especially like if you're in the Navy and there's a ship that had asbestos on it, that might be difficult to prove that, one, the ship had that exposure, unless it was decommissioned for various reason. You have your DD-214 showing you were on that ship, right? You need to show, your evidence needs to show your exposure occurred. That would be awesome. Then it's secondary, because although it's direct to military service due to exposure, it's secondary to exposure, and that's why TERA is not presumptive, because it requires an opinion, right? I would look at, for the average veteran, I would view TERA as a combination of direct and secondary, because it's going to shift our evidence. Now, what do I mean by shifting our evidence? If I'm a veteran and I'm exposed to burn pits, or I'm exposed to JP8 jet fuel, right? Asbestos on a ship, whatever the heck is going on, I want to tell the VA rater on a personal statement and any other evidence I can find, I'm going to present my level of exposure to the VA. What I mean by that is, let's take burn pits, for example. Someone who sleeps 500 meters away in a tent with air conditioning, or that's my phone alarm, or someone who sleeps one click away from the burn pit, are they exposed? Yes, they're exposed, and I don't want to downplay that. But those two individuals, compared to the Lance Corporal who is stirring a barrel of wag bags, pouring JP8 on the burn pit, pouring JP8 into the barrel there to stir wag bags, let's say they do it twice a week, every day on a year deployment, you want to describe your level of exposure and say, hey, here's what I was in direct contact with fumes. Here's what I did. Here's how often I did it. Here's my direct exposure. Did you wear PPE, which is proper protective equipment? That one got me. That's how you want to shift your evidence. Okay. Now, those are all self-reports. And again, anything that you have that can really point to the level of your exposure is only going to help your claim. There's a billion other things with TERA claims, but again, for the average veteran, that's my starting point, is to prove the level of your exposure. Now, that's TERA, right? Not presumptive. It requires an opinion. You want to position your evidence to support your exposure and the diagnosis stemming from the exposure. That part's key. Okay. I do want to shift to presumptive conditions. In this part, presumptives are super easy. Okay. Starting with the PACT Act, which are going to be most, and I'm going to share a link with you here. Not that one. This is the presumptive disability benefits list. It doesn't have every presumptive, but it has a ton of them. Okay. We'll go through that and really talk about presumptive, but basically for presumptives, you need to meet the criteria established for that condition, and then you need to have a current diagnosis. That's it. For PACT Act, it is time and location. So were you at a certain place at a certain time? Yes or no? The VA gives us windows. I'll show you those windows here in a second. And two, do you have a current chronic diagnosis, right? So let's say rhinitis, you need to be diagnosed with rhinitis, whether it's allergic or the other two types of rhinitis conditions. And then did you serve in those locations? If so, bada bing, bada boom, you're good. That's for PACT Act. There are other presumptive conditions like tinnitus or hearing loss within 1 year. There's some cancers that aren't going to be on this list that are presumptive. The presumptive list is a lot bigger than this, but this is going to cover like 90% of all veterans. So it explains what a presumptive is. I'm going to skip that. If you were a former prisoner of war, one, welcome home. Thank you for your service. There's presumptives there. That's not going to be as common. And you can see this list of presumptives, and they have that pretty much for each generation. If you're a Vietnam veteran, one, welcome home. I always say we have the PACT Act because of Vietnam veterans. And don't listen, they may be old, crusty. They might be yelling at you to get off their yard. They might be unpleasant to talk to in the store. But that's because they're probably really mad and angry, and they've dealt with PTSD for 50 years now. So cut them up some slack, all right? But welcome home to you Vietnam veterans. Here we go. time and location, and it's spelled out by the numbers here, right? So if you were exposed to Agent Orange or served in the following locations, so this is an or statement. So either exposed to Agent Orange, you're good. Again, prove your exposure. That part is key there. Or you served in these locations. And I'm just going to cover the first one. I'm not going to go through all of these. This is going to be linked down below in the pinned comment. But Republic of Vietnam or on a vessel operating not more than 12 nautical miles seaward from the demarcation line of the waters of Vietnam and Cambodia between January 9th of 62 and May 7th of 75. So that's a huge time gap there. And then we have, I love how they included 12 nautical miles, right? Because there's a lot of Navy dudes and dudettes who are definitely going to be like, they are Vietnam era veterans. Just because they weren't boots on ground in Vietnam, Cambodia, or Laos does not mean that they didn't serve in Vietnam. And it certainly doesn't mean that they can't be exposed. And so I love how they added the nautical miles here. You'll see the airspace here in a second. But that's it. So if you fall into that, you scroll down, specific presumed conditions. Again, for Vietnam era veterans, here we go. Now, I'm going to cover Gulf War. Obviously, that's going to be the bulk here. But these are going to be your conditions for presumption, okay? For presumption. And this includes Agent Orange. For like hypertension is going to be your go-to there. Don't forget hypertension secondaries like kidney conditions, heart conditions, a stroke. Urinary frequency is one of the most common secondaries due to hypertension medication because you take a diuretic, right? So all of these are beautiful. All right. Now here's atomic veterans. I can't even imagine being exposed to atomic stuff. That's absolutely gotta suck. But again, it has your time location criteria. Then it has specific conditions, and all of these are pretty bad, right? Then we have the Gulf War and post 9/11 veterans. This is my generation, that GWAT generation, and it does include shield storm locations. Okay, so before we go through all the conditions, I want to show you Southwest Asia Theater of Operation. It bugs me that the VA is just weird, but whatever. So Southwest Asia Theater of Operation, there are these countries: Afghan, Israel, Egypt, Turkey, Syria, or Jordan during the Persian Gulf War. Persian Gulf War is shield storm all the way to OIF, OEF, and OIR. Okay. I don't like how they classify that either. I think they should separate those, but I'm a nobody. Anyway, Southwest Asia also includes, and I just wish they would, instead of saying Southwest Asia, the Theater of Operations, just list it there. But you scroll all the way down, and then it defines Southwest Asia Theater of Operations, which refers to Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi, neutral zone between Iraq and Saudi, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, Oman, the Gulf. So again, the Navy here. Don't forget about the Navy, especially our green side corpsmen, right? Gulf of Aden, Oman, Persian Gulf, Arabian Sea, the Red Sea, and the airspace above these locations. So even if you're a veteran who served in Naples or some other air station outside of Southwest Asia or the other countries, but you did regular routine missions to, let's say, Syria, you landed in Kobani landing zone, but you were hanging out in Naples, Italy, right? You still count for Gulf War, at least for PACT Act presumptives. Maybe not the campaign ribbon. Maybe so. I'm not even going to get into MUCMIs. MUCMIs are, in my opinion, the most complicated to understand. Just know that if you have chronic fatigue, fibro, or IBS, and you do rate, this could potentially be presumptive. And I would put presumptive in air quotes there, because really it's got to be under an MUCMI along with all these other symptoms, right? Like one of my good friends has migraines presumptive under the PACT Act for this undiagnosed illness reason, which in his case actually messed him up because he got less back pay than he would have gotten. But regardless, it's service connected. We'll take that as a win. Now, most GWAT veterans for presumption are going to fall into this category here. So here's Southwest Asia Theater of Operation or Afghan honor after September 19, 2001. So again, Southwest Theater of Operations, and that includes this definition down here. Don't forget that. We have our manifest within a degree of 10% or more within 1 year of separation. Within 1 year of separation. So there's an added criteria here. And there we go. Right, you'll see this. And then here's these conditions manifest to a degree of 10% or more at any time after separation. So these are like your true presumptive claims, if you will, because it doesn't have that additional time cap there. This is forever. So here we go. Bam. And then there's another date here. So it has these countries: Afghan, Djibouti, Syria, Uzbekistan, Persian Gulf War from September 19th of 2001 to present, or Southwest Asia Theater of Operations from August 2, 1990 to the present, which is essentially the entire Middle East to include Egypt, Somalia, Djibouti. Okay. Anyway, specific conditions include, and these are definitely more rare. Here's your another, time criteria I can't talk right now. Time criteria for cancers. All right. Now, obviously, that is a big deal. Not as common, but it is sad that there's enough evidence to have these be linked presumptive. I'm glad they're presumptive. I'm glad veterans are getting the benefits that they rate, but it sucks to know that if you meet this criteria, you are way more likely, and that's the scientific measurement I'm using there, to develop these cancers, which, in case you're wondering, that's not good news, right? Anyways, then you have the more common illnesses, like, here we go, asthma that was diagnosed after service. That part's key there. If it's diagnosed before service, you're on aggravation, which again, I think is a difficult claim. But you have bronchitis, you have COPD, and then you have hands down, the most common presumptives for the Gulf War era, chronic rhinitis and sinusitis there. You have constrictive, you have emphysema, and then you have all of these conditions. And again, there we go. So that's presumptive. Presumptive means you don't need an opinion. You just need to meet the criteria for the presumption, which could be time. It could be time and location. It could be time, location, plus time, where you have that added, within 1 year. Tinnitus and hearing loss have a presumptive for within 1 year after leaving service. There's a few other presumptive conditions. But yeah, that's presumptive. Presumptive does not require an opinion. TERA does require an opinion. And that's the last step. You go through increases, you go through secondaries, you go through denials, you go through new claims, you go through presumptive and TERA. You're constantly looking at the theories of service connection, and you're constantly shifting your evidence to meet the requirements of that theory of service connection, or the basis of service connection. That's the 5 steps. If you haven't seen the other 5 videos, you absolutely should. I make them as thorough as I possibly could. The denials one was definitely the most difficult to do because it's very scenario based, but increases, secondaries, denials, new claims, right? That's assuming direct, maybe some secondary in there. And then you have your presumptive and TERA. But those are the 5 steps. I hope this playlist helps you out, and everything I used here is going to be linked down below. One thing I totally forgot to share with you, or then I'll do this really quick. There are new presumptives that aren't on that list as of January 8th of 2025, and it is acute and chronic leukemias, multiple myelomas. I'm not going to try to pronounce that word. Okay. Let me zoom in here just so you can see this a little better. Then you have your urinary bladder, ureter, and related G cancers, presumptive for service, and then you have the time criteria there. So I'm going to leave this down below in the pinned comments. And that is all I got. Thank you very much. If you made it to the very end, please let me know. I always love when people let me know that they made it to the end. I appreciate it. Share this with a friend, like, subscribe, do all the things. It helps me out personally, and it also helps get the information out to more veterans. Thank you.